Welcome back to part two of the Exit Planning Myths webinar. For those of you who watched all of part one, I guess you decided you wanted to come and join me to find out some more of these myths in this part. And if you're tuning in with this webinar and haven't had a chance to catch what was discussed in part one, I would encourage you maybe to, as soon as you're done watching this, to go back and watch it, because while it's not necessarily a lot of material that you need to hear before we discuss things today, the reality is there's a lot of considerations in there which are really worth your time. So without further ado, let's kind of jump right into where we left off. And what we're going to be taking a look at today is part two, as I said, and this is where we're going to be really focusing on money myths, valuations, advisors, and deal dynamics. Last time we talked a lot about operations. Today, we're going to be looking at a lot of the other aspects. And the first thing I want to start with is the harsh reality that 98% of people overestimate their company's value. Now, this could be by a little, this could be by a lot, but the reality is the overwhelming majority of people, when it comes to estimating the value of their business, they err on the high side. And here's some other important statistics that we need to kind of keep in mind, and that is that 75% of business owners regret selling within 1 year. 30% of deals fall apart between the letter of intent and closing, and only 5% are satisfied with exit outcomes. So obviously, there's a lot of reasons for this, but a big part of it is basically found in a lot of the myths here that really kind of put people in a tremendous disadvantage, especially if you watch part one when we talked about the operational side, things that will really drive down the value. So today, really the valuation myths we're going to be looking at are going to range from the do-it-yourself delusion, deal dynamics and due diligence myths, hidden barriers, as well as action steps. And so it's my desire that at the end of this seminar, you get a really good chance that really get a good viewpoint of what you need to do in order to succeed. So let's dive in right now. And again, that 98% misconception rate, which really I want to kind of focus on that for a moment, is nearly all businesses overestimate their company's value. And the reason why this is such an important figure to keep in mind is the number one reason why deals fall apart is a mismatch when it comes to the seller's expectation of what the value is. So you can see right off the bat the fact that almost everybody is thinking that the business is more valuable than it is. The reality is we're already off to a bad start. So, on this note, this is the reason why getting a business valuation is so helpful, because it not only enables you to manage expectations in terms of seeing what the actual value is, but also, more importantly, it shows you key benchmarks and areas in which you can actually improve your business. So that's an important number. And, let's kind of cap out with the valuation myths here for a moment. And, some things that we need to kind of focus on here is really two things. EBITDA, as you see, which represents a company's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And what this is doing is this is really trying to provide insight into operational profitability. And it really helps to give better comparisons across businesses in the same industry. Now, you might think, okay, why is it that we focus it on EBITDA and not net profit? Personally, I would prefer net profit, because with EBITDA, it's like, it's basically the earnings before, several actual line items of expenses. If it were my choice, which it is not, we would go with net profit. Just basically get everything out so we could actually see, okay, what does everything look after every single conceivable expense and deduction. Now, free cash flow is what indicates the cash a company is able to generate after accounting for capital expenditures. And what this is important is it highlights the amount of financial flexibility and ability to reinvest in growth or distribute dividends. So like, for example, what this free cash flow is saying is like, okay, after, after any major expenses you've had, what do you still have? And when it comes to capital expenditures, we're not necessarily talking about large expenses. Capital expenditures usually involve, investments in actual, fixed assets, at things that you're actually, tools that you actually are probably going to be using for the business. So those are two important metrics that we need to keep an eye on. And, industry multiples is another key. And this is kind of where we really are going to start seeing some of these myths come up. So when it comes to benchmark analysis, is these industrial benchmarks really serve as essential reference points when it comes to business valuation, because it gives us an idea of like, okay, this is what the industry benchmark is. Well, based on where you are, which may be here, here, or here, okay, based on that benchmark, then we have a really good reference point for where things are. And again, this is going to help us with managing realistic expectations. And of course, market conditions, I don't think that really needs to be explained, just because, anybody who has any sense of business, which, quite frankly, if you live in this world, you understand what market conditions are, like even with the housing market. Okay. Right now, the housing market's not so great. Back several years ago when the housing market was hot and the values were being driven up, we would say, it was a very tight housing market. Market conditions, again, that's the same thing when it comes to, business sales and, same constraints. Now, both of these have a significant impact in the industry multiples. If you're not necessarily doing really well in the benchmark analysis, but the market is such that businesses such as in your industry are going for high value, okay, that will result in one multiple. If you have a benchmark that, even though on paper you look identical to another business, your benchmark is showing that you actually are exceeding everything, just because, especially like with rate of growth and the market conditions are good, you're going to have a huge jump in multiples. So I use this to illustrate, because you can see very quickly how two businesses on the surface look like, they could be identical, but the reality is one could have a much higher value because of the industry multiples. Now, one myth that I want to kind of dispel here is the industry multiples myth, and that's basically related to EBITDA multiple myth. And that's like, okay, well, all I need to do is figure out whatever the industry multiple is times my EBITDA, and that's going to equal my value. Well, yeah, that's going to give you an idea, but another thing that's going to weigh in, which is why we talked about free cash flow, that's going to have a significant impact too. So buyers value that. And, even though you may have good value based on EBITDA, they may look at your free cash flow and say, okay, no, let's knock that down a little. So basically you have that variable, that we need to take into account. Now, as I mentioned earlier, is when it comes to business value, and we're going to kind of park on this for a moment before we get to this slide that I've switched to. Here are some factors that can cause values to vary wildly. Company size. You could have, if you have twice as many employees as another employee, this is going to have a lot of impacts. How dependent on the business is the owner. Medium dependence is going to impact it, substantial less and high dependence. And if it's low dependence, well, you're going to get a really good multiple. Customer concentration, which we discussed in the last webinar, if one of your customers accounts for 50% of your business, that's a huge red flag. And that's going to probably result in your business actually not being sellable. Growth sustainability. Is it clear that, okay, your current growth trajectory is actually sustainable? Or, did you just have a surge this year and it's clear that there's nothing that's going to help continue the momentum? Financial record quality. What are they? Did the books need to be cleaned up, or are they essentially GAAP compliant? And then management team strength. So these are factors that will influence the multiples, factors that we actually went into a little bit more detail last time. Now, also on this point, we also have the my friend, my sold the business for X amount myth. Well, here's the reality. Even if that your friend is in the exact same industry, same company size, there is a very good chance that you're going to get a different deal. And even if they were identical, let's say, because again, market conditions is going to be impacted, and also the deal structure. You may not be able to get the same type of deal structure that they had. So the reality is, if so and so sold a business for such amount, and it's like, okay, you feel like you should be able to get that. Well, no, forget it. You may be excited when you see the amount they got. The reality is your business is going to be completely different, and there are a lot of variables we're going to need to look at to determine what the value is. Now, the buyers will pay for potential myth. And when I told a friend of mine, Sean Gold, who I'm giving him a shout out here in this webinar, that I was going to be doing this, I told him that I was very tempted to do, but Evan, which it's kind of a tribute to his, but Sean, he likes to do when it comes to his posts. So we'll just do that for Sean here. But Evan, I have this business that if somebody comes along and invests in it, it's going to cause them to really want to that they'll really make a killing. Well, yeah, it's possible. Okay, if somebody wants to scale the business, they might be able to benefit from that. But if you're going to be saying that's your leading question, the big question they'll have is, well, if that's the case, why didn't you do it? Because, if this is something that you didn't do, but you say, okay, somebody can do it, a legit question will be, well, why didn't you do it? And if it's and there's really no good answer to that question. You may think there's a good answer, but there is none. Okay. So here is the deal. And we're going to, kind of get to that before we get to this unlocking potential, is your tax accountant is not equal to your M&A financial advisor. What you're going to need is you're going to need a quality of earnings analysis, revenue sustainability, margin analysis, working capital, and add backs and normalizations. Now, in order to unlock the potential here, what you're also going to need to do really is have these three things. Strong management team that's going to be able to really be effective in managing proprietary technology, which, really at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be proprietary tech. It could be just it really could be anything, but whatever it is, you need to have something that is innovative, and your ability to deliver it is such that, that is what causes people to come back. And then a loyal customer base. That's what you need in order to unlock potential. So now that we've countered those myths, okay, so some essential steps for financial preparation. We've talked about, some of this. Accurate records is important. Get the books cleaned up. If you decide that being a season's ticket holder to the Dallas Mavericks, or, basically your subscription to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra are legitimate business expenses, I got some news for you. Unless you have some substantial backing to indicate that, you are using this for business, which I could get it. If you have a box office for the Dallas, maybe say the Dallas Cowboys, and you're using it as a means to entertain clients, yeah, okay, that's a legit, that could be very much legit. But the reality is, most of the time, we don't have that. And I just wanted to offer that caveat that I know that some of these things, they actually could be used if leveraged properly for business expenses. But, you want to make sure you have accurate records, you have a clean balance sheet, and you have excellent revenue growth. Okay, so now that we have talked about it, let's talk a little bit about the advisor value. You might be thinking, but Evan, the reality is I can do this. I figured out how to get to this point. Well, here's the reality. you're essentially going to need to perform surgery to extricate yourself from this business. There's a reason why surgeons do not perform surgery on themselves. It's because of, well, I mean, but we don't really need to go into detail. But the reality is there's a lot of accuracy with that analogy. And while, yeah, you might be able to do it yourself, the reality is, you know, this is a huge myth. And what's going to likely happen is you're going to probably go into the sale and exit and then realize, hey, I left a ton of money on this table and wind up regretting it. So so basically the DIY myth, it really needs to be debunked. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the advisor value. Now, this is the price increase with advisors, anywhere from 6 to 25%. There's a very good chance that what's probably going to happen is, especially if you build out a team, like what I like to work with is basically a team comprised of the wealth manager to help advise the business owner and plan for their exit, basically their retirement, the M&A advisor who handles the sale, and then me as the fractional COO. You know, something like that is going to really, really get your valuation more around the 25%. And you might be thinking, yeah, well, I'm going to be paying a bit more. Well, you already, like your wealth manager, it's already, basically the way they handle your finances, you're paying for that. M&A advisor, they may have a retainer at the beginning, but at least M&A firm Vestacore that I like to work with, basically whatever you pay at the beginning, you're going to get credited from their success fee. So, essentially you're going to pay them their success fee. And, with me as a monthly retainer, which basically that's what you're going to get, it could be 100 to 300, 180 to 300,000 if it's 3 to 5 years. If it's 3 years, 180,000. If it's 5 years, then 300,000. I don't know about you, but that type of investment, which that's really going to be the biggest out-of-pocket expense that you're going to have. And, obviously business valuations will cost and some of the other things will. But at the end of the day, considering what you're going to be getting, a 25% increase, I feel like it's safe to say, like, yeah, DIY, it don't work. It's one of those things that it's just not going to be successful. Likely a 1.5 EBITDA multiple increase is going to be there. Here's the thing. PE firms are going to use advisors in 98.7% of sales. And the reality is, you're probably going to do this once in your life professionally. You may do it multiple times. I mean, there are serial entrepreneurs who will build a business and then sell it, then build another business and sell it. What you need to realize is that's probably not going to be you. This is likely going to be the only time you're going to do something like this. And if you surrender yourself with a team of advisors who's going to be able to help you with the value, if they're the ones doing this for a living, you're coming up against buyers who do this for a living. Why not even the playing field by surrounding yourself with a advisory team that is able to really help you throughout it? Okay, so here are the DIY time costs. I find this DIY approach rather amusing because I love to do stuff around the house, especially DIY jobs. And there were some times I look at it and I realize, hey, if I'd actually got a professional to do some of this, there's a really good chance that I would have saved a lot of time and money, my time and money for that when I tried to do it. And that's why, there are certain jobs I won't do. But jobs that I actually can do and I actually know what I'm doing, I don't mind it. Here's the problem when it comes to DIY time costs and really the hidden expenses of DIY planning. There's going to be an opportunity cost because basically all the time that you're going to be spending on your exit planning, without basically on your own, you're going to be neglecting core business operations. And you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm trying to exit plan. How do I exit plan if I don't focus on that? Well, the reality is having a value accelerator, they're the one who's trying to help you out and basically pick up the slack, so to speak. So that way, core business operations are not being neglected and, you're able to focus on it. So, that's another big problem. Overconfidence risk is another big one because, a DIY attempt can really give you a false sense of confidence. And the results are going to be you're going to be missing insight from advisors. And ultimately, you could wind up taking a huge haircut when it comes to the value of your business. So, here are some of the specialist needs that you're going to need to have. Legal due diligence. The way that I like to work on this is I actually have a platform for tracking the due diligence of process, making sure we get all the documents together. Once you get all those legal documents together, you're going to need to have somebody who is going to be able to handle them. And that's why the M&A advisory firm Vesticor I work with, they have a team that works with that. Tax implications. This is a big thing you're going to need to do with your wealth manager. You're going to need to be able to understand all the tax consequences for every aspect of your deal so you can develop a tax efficient strategy. And then financial planning, you're going to need to have a very thorough plan. In addition to, working an expert who makes sure that your business is in good shape and, you have everything planned out well, you're going to need to have somebody be the working on the personal side. And the reality is, we may even a well-run business. The reality is the finances of the owner almost always impact the business. If you don't believe me, take a look at what happened with Manchester United when the Glazer family bought it. In order to purchase this club, they had to acquire a large amount of debt in order to make it work. And the result was, because of all the debt that they acquired, it resulted in huge jumps in ticket prices. And, the fans were not happy, but, hey, that's a sad reality of what happened is the business owners basically the debt that they had to take on in order to purchase this club. Well, the result was they had to pass it on to the fans. Okay, so here is when it comes to justifying your investment in advisors, which really this is aimed at, helping to get you to move back from the DIY fallacy. And that is, advisors are going to be able to help enhance your overall business value significantly. One of the benefits of getting a valuation done right at the beginning is you can see absolutely everything that you need to do in order to get the business ready for sale. And having an advisor come in, look at it, they know, okay, yeah, we're not doing well against these benchmarks. We need to address this, or we're struggling here. We need to do that. Risk, proper guidance is going to be able to help reduce potential pitfalls in transactions. One big area is, when it comes to succession planning, as well as making sure you have key people retained. Because one of the fastest ways to have a value get devalued is if, you haven't done enough to keep key people in place and they leave. I remember one story a while back. Business was going to sell for 80 million, wound up selling for 50 million. The reason why was two key people left. They weren't told about the possibility of a sale, and when they found out, very shortly after, they left. And then finally, the process. Streamlined transactions are going to lead to faster, successful exits. The way I like to do it is I like to have be working while I'm getting the business optimized, make sure we get all of our due diligence documentation in place. So that way, when it comes time for us to move to the sale process, hey, we already have the leadership team built out. They're not only gelling, but they're really ramping towards scaling this business. We're able to hand off to whoever's handling the M&A side of things, the documentation, so they're able to very quickly, get to work. So, having a team of advisors who work together is going to help reduce substantially the amount of time needed. And it will also enable us to be able to really focus a little bit more with the time that we have on really getting things done as well as possible. Okay, so here are some deal realities that we're going to jump into. And really kind of before we do that, one of the myths I feel like I need to really hit here is that my regular advisors can handle it myth with as far as this deal is concerned. Well, here's the reality. Your tax accountant, they do tax returns. They don't do M&A financial analysis. You might, even when it comes to business valuation. Well, the reality is what is probably going to happen with that business valuation is, they're going to just look purely at, what the income is, and just do an EBITDA valuation and say, okay, well, based on and that's not going to take into market conditions or other benchmarks. Okay, your business attorney, they do contracts. They probably do not have a lot of experience with M&A purchase agreements. They might, but there's a very good chance they might not. If you feel like, well, they can, ask them. And if they say no, then realize, okay, well, even though you may like doing business with them, this is something that's out of their field. Okay, experience gap, 0 to 5 deals versus 50 to 500 deals. This is going to be you in that 0 to 5 deals. Some of these buyers, professional buyers, they've done 50 to 500 deals. So, and, maybe more. So the reality is, your advisory team, they're not used to this. They're playing with a different, it's a completely different game. So, having said this, let's now move into the deal realities. Now that we've kind of debunked why your regular advisory team is probably not going to be able to handle it. Okay, due diligence traps. And here's the reality. Due diligence is not a formality. This is where your deals are going to live or die. And, really, the best practice is to have 80% of your info shared before it begins. Ideally, when it comes to having due diligence, my approach when I was working on my doctoral dissertation is really bled over to here. When I go to due diligence, I want to have everything in order. And really, that's what you need to have. Incomplete documentation is going to scuttle it. Unclear financial records, it's going to raise red flags and cause them to back away. And here is probably the most important aspect of, due diligence. And that is that buyers are looking to find reasons to either reduce the price or walk. They're not interested in buying a business and thinking, oh, wow, this business is this valuable. No, they're looking for any reasons. And it's kind of like the same way that we do with a house. It's like, okay, if there's a problem with this, well, I'm going to need to fix it. So I want a price reduction. Same thing with a business. Is if it's a buyer, they're looking at it. And if they think that it's overvalued, they're going to be looking at reasons to either ask for a price reduction or like, no, let's move on to the next one. So again, what do buyers examine? Well, we've kind of hit on it earlier. Financial accuracy, customer concentration, key employee dependencies, operational documentation, legal and regulatory compliance, technology or IP ownership, and vendor relationships. Those are very, very, very important things that you need to be aware of. And, if you think like a buyer, you're going to be able to make your business, act. You'll be able to make your business attractive to a buyer. So, having laid all of that out, I want to get into the LOI price myth. Now, an owner thinks, okay, letter of intent, okay, this is what the business is priced at. This is the final price. Not necessarily. The reality is that is the beginning, not the end, and the price is non-binding. Now, when we say LOI price, at least the way that Vestacor does it is an LOI is like, okay, they're interested in it. They've looked at and while, okay, the price, they may have an idea of what the price is. What's going to happen is you're going to have a bidding process. You're going to sit, and there might be about a couple dozen. That's going to get whittled down to 6 people who are buyers who are considered serious, then they're going to have competitive bids. So there's a chance it might go up until, they look in and with due diligence and they may start going, okay, well, actually, now that we're really going through this with the fine-tooth comb, we have a little problem with this. We want to reduce our ask. So, that might happen. So really, the reality is what the price is at an LOI, especially the way Vestacore does it, no, that's not anywhere close. That's likely a starting point. Get ready for it to probably go up and down. Now, retrading. So when does this happen? Well, after LOI and during due diligence. An example is, you might have a 20% cut and then, possibly a 30% cash reduction 2 weeks before close. And what's going to happen is exclusivity here is going to be locking you in and killing leverage. So here are some challenges with retrading. Obviously, market fluctuations are going to impact the deal. It could force things to be renegotiated. Kind of like what I was saying earlier. Buyer concerns. It's like, okay, the buyers are scrutinizing things, and then, they start seeing them discrepancies and like, uh-oh. And then obviously here, preparation is the key. Is if you don't want to get involved in retrading, then, you got to be thoroughly prepared, or otherwise they're going to come back and say, well, actually, now that we've kind of looked at this, we want to price that discount. So that's basically how we can prevent it. Now, earnouts. This is something that I remember a while back hearing about a financial advisor who had a buyer, told a story about a seller who didn't know that he was going to get earnouts on his business. And he wound up getting $1 million over the course of 3 years, $1 million per year. Well, they needed to restructure that just because that would have been a bit of a tax nightmare. And thankfully, they found out in time they were able to get things figured out, so that way they were able to save him a good bit with money. Now, when it comes to earnouts, here is what likely you might be seeing. It's going to appear possibly in about 30% of deals, might be 10 to 25% of the purchase price. Now, the problem here, it's going to be trading any of today's disagreement over price potentially into tomorrow's litigation. And the reality is metrics could get manipulated and definitions are ambiguous, and very often it's unachievable. Now, if you are in a situation where you're thinking about an earnout, here's what needs to happen. You're going to need to make sure that you have consistent performance that is going to be essential for earnout success. And, obviously, you want to, when it comes to any dispute of potential, you want to make sure that earnouts are calculated so that you can really prevent any conflicts. And then, really financial clarity is going to really help, when it comes to mitigating any earnout disagreements. So, earnouts, it's a part of the business. It's something that, basically will happen. As you can see, it's when there's a perception like, okay, well, it might not be as valuable as you think it is, but here's what we're going to do is we're basically going to say, we'll give you X amount. And if the business performs at this level over the course of the next few years, then we will give you X amount earnouts on that business. So, the reality is there are risks with this and with anything. It's all a matter of understanding it. And really a lot of this is going to come out to, it's like, okay, if when you're selling a business, there's some concern that, it might not have the value that you think it does. And, that's really kind of where the earnout is going to come into play. Now, let's take a look at hidden barriers that, it'll be like, okay, could really derail a deal. And, let's talk about key employees. You might think, but Evan, I have employees here who they just love it. They love their job. They have good pay. They have great benefits. Why would they want to leave? Well, here's the problem. you're the one saying they have great pay and great benefits. They may not necessarily agree with you. I remember working with somebody who liked to talk about, whenever he gave a pay raise, he's like, oh, yeah, that's a lot, and this, that, and the other. Well, the problem was I looked at it and like, okay, compared to what I was getting, it was better, but compared to, what, was comparable out in the actual workforce, it wasn't. And and as a result, so really the reality is when it comes to key employees is we need to just make sure that we don't make any assumptions. And really the myth here is like, okay, your employees like it. And, if they seem satisfied, then, hey, no problems. Well, here's the reality. If an employee senses the sale or gets nervous, they're going to make demands. I know they might leave if they leave during due diligence, kind of like the illustration I gave earlier, the buyer's going to balk and you could wind up with a large reduction. Now, here's what you can do. You can have retention mechanisms such as bonuses, like 90, 180, or 360 days post-sale, clear future role communication, transaction bonuses. You may even try like a kind of a golden handcuffs thing where like, okay, they have like some kind of insurance policy or deal that, okay, as long as they stay X amount of years, they will get it. But if they leave, they forfeit it. So there are different strategies that you can use to reduce your key employee risk. Now, down here is how you can identify your key employees. First thing you got to do is figure out who are the critical employees who drive success. And everybody's going to have different ideas. Like I remember a while back talking with somebody who, when I asked who one of his key employees was, it was actually his secretary. The reason why was she was the only one who knew how to do all the paperwork. I mean, he and everybody else were able to get the work done, but she was the one who knew how to get all the paperwork done that ensured they not only got the jobs, but they kept the jobs. And then obviously, like I said, providing incentives is going to be key. You definitely should sit down and talk and try and find ways to make sure that you can lock them in. And then obviously you got to foster development where, if you can invest in training and career growth opportunities, that is going to be a powerful incentive. Because here's the reality. It's not necessarily just about the pay. It's the ability to advance professionally. If you can show to your employees that they have the opportunity to advance professionally by staying here, they may not like where they are. And your good employees are going to likely have this desire to excel. But, if you can show that you're willing to foster development and want to help them succeed professionally, there's a good chance that they're going to stay just because it's not just about the money. It's about the entire package, something that they may not be able to get elsewhere. And then finally, when it comes to creating engagement, you got to build a positive culture that values contributions. This starts at the top. I've lost count on a number of organizations who've talked and they're like, okay, we have some culture problems. How do we fix it? Well, the first way you fix it is realizing that culture is defined by whoever is at the top. And if they're not willing to affect a positive cultural change, it's going to go nowhere fast. So now that we have that, let's take a look a little bit at your intellectual property assets here. This is an important area that we tend to kind of forget that could completely derail your deal. And really the myth here is like, everything, I already took care of it. Well, here's the problem. Do you have everything thoroughly documented to ensure that you have clear ownership of all IP assets? Like do you own patents? Do you have it very thoroughly? I mean, because otherwise somebody might come along and say, hey, actually, you don't have that. That's actually, you never patented. So, and I actually talked with a business owner a while back who actually, not only got the patent, but he also won in court over people who tried to take advantage of it. And then that kind of dovetails with infringement is, if you have something that is patented Are you able to identify and actually address any potential infringements? And then, also, do you have all of these assets that are thoroughly inventoried as well so that you can see what their value is? And then finally, do you have a strategy to protect your your IP assets? Now, obviously, this is something that not all business owners are going to have, and this is an area that sometimes is neglected because of the fact that it's very specific to business owners. But it's an area that you got to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row. Okay, financial cleanliness for exit success. You might think, okay, well, I've already I've checked. My accountant says everything is all fine and good. Well, yeah, they may say it's all fine and good, but that's for day-to-day operations. Okay, when it comes to accounting for your business, is everything accurate and current? Even if you have good bookkeeping, you know, do you actually do your monthly closes? I remember working with a business once that I was able to actually eventually get to the point where we were pretty consistently had the month closed out within a couple of days. And that's the beauty of a lot of the online programs is once you capture bank transactions, you can pretty quickly get everything finished out within the first 7 days of the month. So closing the books is not necessary. Monthly close is not necessarily as hard as it used to be. In fact, it actually can even become a bit of a non-event just if you do it right. But if you're not doing it right, even if your records are accurate up to a point, that's a problem. Okay, tax liabilities. Have we addressed and resolved any outstanding tax obligations? That's going to be a potential problem. Would you as a business owner want to come in and have to all of a sudden have to deal with certain tax obligations that the previous owner didn't want to deal with? I don't know about you, but I don't think I would. Financial strategies. What strategies do you have implemented to make sure that this business has good sustained financial health? And then finally, transparency. And obviously the beauty of GAAP accounting is it's designed for publicly held companies. My goal is to get things as GAAP compliant as possible. I'm not a stickler on this, but really the whole concept of GAAP accounting is for transparency by fostering openness in financial dealings and reports. And if you can get that type of cleanliness, that way you're in great shape. Now, emotional preparation. This is something that really has not come to the fore until recently. And this is about navigating life after an exit. For years, and I think this is more the fault of financial advisors and retirement specialists. We focused on what's the number that you need for retirement. Now, what we realize is okay, what are you going to do with your retirement? And really, one of the fallacies is okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to travel the world. Well, really? You're going to travel the world? If you've exited the business and you're going to live 20 years, that's all you're going to do? The reality is you probably haven't thought through, or you might say, yeah, I'm going to move to Colorado. Okay, great. You're going to move to Colorado. What are you going to do then? So the reality is there's a lot that needs to be done here. It's not a matter of okay, once I exit, I'm just going to just do whatever. You need to have a plan. It's not a matter of okay, just basically the myth here, I guess we could label as just being carefree. You need to acknowledge that there's an emotional investment in your business, because once you leave, there's going to be there's going to be an emotional impact there. And you need to acknowledge that, but then you need to develop a plan for how you're going to find fulfillment and invest your time post-exit. So let's kind of begin to work towards the framework for preparation. We've debunked a lot of myths here, and I hope that this has really helped clear things up. First things first is really the 3 to 5 year preparation advantage in enhancing business value. This is what I tell people. It's like if you're 3 to 5 years out from exiting, I want to talk with you because we need that window in order to make sure things work. It gives you a chance to really develop some good early planning by taking strategic actions now, so that way it's going to maximize the value. Gives you a chance to optimize by streamlining operations and enhancing efficiency and profitability. You're going to be able to take a look at your weaknesses and get a good assessment. You're going to you'll identify those issues and really be able to boost them. Again, remember that business valuation I said right at the beginning? We'll be able to use that to help us very quickly identify a lot of weaknesses. I have assessments that I do that are aimed at that as well. But our goal is to very quickly identify all of our weaknesses so that way we can really boost market appeal. And then the final thing is attractiveness. We need to improve the presentation so that way we're going to be able to attract prospective buyers effectively. So here's a bit of a rough timeline. It's not necessarily one that's stuck in stone. Obviously, my philosophy is if you can get it done sooner, you go for it. Year one, comprehensive assessment, strategic planning. Really, the way that my plan works is the first few weeks I'm onboarding, I'm trying to learn as much of the business. Then we have a phase 2, which is a strategic impact plan, basically a 90-day sprint to really try to identify absolutely everything that we need to do, get some quick wins, and not only that, but also make sure that we identify everything that we need to do long term. Then phase 3, which it's still going to happen that first year, that's when we're really taking everything we identified in phase 2, and we are very thoroughly trying to develop plans to address it and really help get the business to grow. So second year, it's financial optimization or really business optimization. You're trying to enhance profitability, streamline operations, and really improve the overall business valuation. Year 3, if we need to have any legal and tax structuring, that's the time to do it. Obviously, if we're doing well in year 2, move that up. And if there's any compliance issues we're facing, let's try to get those taken care of in order to facilitate a smooth and successful transaction. And, obviously, year 4, that's probably when you're going to be needing to do the due diligence when it comes to the actual sale part of the process. The way I like to do this, again, is have this ongoing during the first few years. So that way, when we get to this year, we don't have to do due diligence. It's already been done. We can move on to the sale. And this step is basically once you get your due diligence taken care of, this is going to ensure that all your potential liabilities are mitigated. And then obviously comes to the sale process. You're negotiating strategies to secure favorable terms. Well, I've given this as a potential timeline, which basically I feel like it's a little generous. I feel like we could generally get it closer to 3. I realize sometimes that this is going to be the necessity just because some of these milestones are going to take longer to achieve. And then finally, obviously, we need to close the deal effectively. And, really the way, if you want to have a good closing, everything that comes before it needs to be not only done well, but done very well. And just make sure we not only get it right, but we just keep trying. We just focus on being proactive and doing the absolute best possible. So here are some immediate actions. If you're thinking, hey, this is the conversation I need to have now, get an exit assessment. Call me. Our first call, 30-minute call, I want to hear your story, figure it out. I can tell you what I can do. But what you really need to do is you need to get an assessment. You need to figure out where you are. And then you need to assemble an advisor team. I like to work on a team of at least 3. The wealth manager, which is going to be helping look after your finances. Me handling the fractional COO work as what we would label in CEPA terminology, the value accelerator. And then the M&A advisor, who's going to be handling this deal. You may need to have more team members, but the key here is with the advisory team is you need to make sure that you have the right advisors who know what to do, who are going to be able to guide you throughout the process. So take the next step today. And again, the offer is on the table. I'd love to sit down and talk with you and discuss your situation and explore options. It's quite conceivable that hey, if you're thinking about this in say 10 or 15 years at the earliest, hey, it's never too early to start thinking about things. And it's it's possible that if we sit down and talk, we can help shave some time off of that exit. But just again, this is open to anyone. I'd love to talk and see what we can do. So, here is my contact information. I definitely love to connect and talk with you. I wanted to thank you for sitting through this second part of the webinar. And, I'd like to encourage you that if you haven't had a chance to watch part 1 yet, go back and watch it because, again, this is very, very important information that's absolutely crucial to making sure that you have a successful exit. So I want to thank everybody for their time, and I just hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.